Hello, everybody. Welcome to MHTV. We're really pleased to have you with us here tonight. And we're so lucky. We've got two fantastic practitioners and people who've worked really hard to bring some quality improvement to mental health space. And we're really pleased and proud to celebrate their work. We hope that you'll join in with us. Before we get started, though, let's go to Vanessa so she can tell you how you can join in tonight.
Hi everyone. Looking forward to you joining the conversation tonight. Hopefully you can join in as always in one or two ways, either on Facebook Live, go onto the Unite MHNA Facebook page and you should see the live stream pop up there. You can join the conversation and watch the live stream. We encourage you to comment and ask any questions. Tonight's a sensitive topic, so equally if you need to mute us tonight, we understand. If you prefer Twitter, if you head over to Twitter and just type in MHTV hashtag, and you should see the conversation pop up there. And again, please ask any questions or feed any comments in, and I'll be monitoring both Facebook and Twitter. I'll hand back over to Nicky.
Absolutely. So, Debbie, please, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi. I'm a bit nervous, so I'll be fine once I get going, I think. So my name's Debbie Francis. I'm actually not a practitioner, but I'm an expert by experience. So my background is as a carer. I supported my daughter over 13 years through some serious mental health issues, including suicidality and self-harming behaviours. So that's a kind of particular area of interest of mine. And I've been working with our local mental health trust, so in Devon Partnership Trust, around sort of the field of suicide prevention, but also carer awareness and carer involvement, I guess. So trying to promote a different way of working, and recently completed a master's in mental health recovery and social inclusion.
Yeah, brilliant. And congratulations on that.
Thank you.
George, can you tell us a little about yourself?
Yes, so my name is Georgina Adams, George Adams. I am a social worker by profession, and have spent most of my working career actually working in children's social work, which is a very long time to work in child protection. But and after 30 years, decided to go into adult mental health, and I worked for a couple of years in our secure services, running our social work team across secure services in Devon Partnership Trust, as Debbie said. And then 18 months ago, it is now, it feels like it's kind of gone in a flash, but also been a very long time. 18 months ago, I joined our suicide prevention team in Devon Partnership Trust, which is called the Safe from Suicide team. And I joined there because there was some real recognition across the team from all the national research that actually we needed to be doing much more work around our family and our care involvement, building it and improving it, particularly around suicide prevention. And so we've kind of thrown into this quality improvement project, thrown in with Debbie as well, I would say. That was the first time I met Debbie when I started this. And we have very much been part of helping to co-produce and co-deliver what became named Stronger Together, which is essentially a quality improvement project trying to reduce suicide risk, improve patient safety through carer collaboration. So, and Debbie and I, as I said, have been working together for those 18 months, kind of, putting the finishing touches to the training and also co-delivering that training.
Yeah. So that's, and I don't mind who jumps on this question. It would be a good idea for us to get sort of a bit of context of what the issue was, why you needed to take action.
Shall I go for it, George?
So on you go, Debbie, and then I'll jump in.
Okay. So I think, both nationally and at local level, there's recognition in the statistics around suicide, deaths by suicide, that a lack of carer involvement kept coming up as a recurrent theme in being a contributory factor to deaths by suicide. So the National Confidential Inquiry into Suicide and Safety in Mental Health, so that's NCISH for short. Their evidence also supports that and identifies carer involvement as one of the key areas for suicide prevention and improved patient safety. So initially, so that was, I guess, what prompted Devon Partnership Trust starting this piece of work, wanting to try and create a solution, I suppose. And that started a co-production process with clinicians, carers, and experts by experience who had survived suicide. So we all came together over just over a year to look at the issue and to co-create a solution. So very much Stronger Together grew out of that co-production process. And suicide is, it's a massive public health issue in this country, across the world, but it's also seen as a preventable phenomenon. And suicide prevention has been really sort of targeted by the World Health Organization, as well as government policy and local policies, and all levels. Carer inclusion is cited as being important, and that we should be doing and working collaboratively with carers, but the evidence shows that it doesn't necessarily happen, which is very much my own personal experience as well.
I mean, the kind of data tells us that there are over 6,000 people that take their own lives every year still in this country, and a good quarter to a third of those people are involved with mental health services. So most people aren't involved with mental health services, but sort of 26-27% of people have been involved with mental health services. And so that's why it's really key for us as an organisation to making sure that we are, because one of the key things, Debbie talked about NCISH, and one of the key things that NCISH talk about is by improving that family and care involvement, patients are safer, you will reduce the suicide levels, they will go down, patients will be safer, but it also improves the experience for, by working with carers, improves for the members of staff, it's a better working experience, and for carers, we know, and Debbie will talk about, I'm sure we can ask Debbie about some of the impacts that caring role can have. But actually involving carers, what is the research tells us it's a much better experience for them in terms of their physical health, mental health, financial stresses. So it ticks all the boxes to say actually why it's so important that we are involving carers. But at the same time, as Debbie said, is what we know is that actually, despite years of policy, years of research, there is still huge problems about working with carers, that there are still some real challenges there. So this was very much about trying to break down some of that, break down some of those barriers, trying to change the culture, across our working organisation.
Well, let's focus in on that, because I think that there's a couple of us. Just because something makes absolute sense doesn't mean that we're going to do that.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that's really like, why? Whenever you come to quality improvement, you get people who will say, we can't tell carers what's going on because of confidentiality, and I'm sure you guys have come across that a billion times.
Yes.
And people who aren't sure about what they can and can't do go to the default acting like they're in the CIA and saying nothing at all and causing tremendous distress.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Have you any sort of thoughts around that?
Well, just I would say that actually my experience, and I think Debbie's experience, and Debbie, I'll get Debbie to share what her experience was like being a family member, but certainly that's what we've, as a professional, that's what my experience is exactly what you're saying, Nicky, that people, and when we did in our part of the workshops, we did some feedback forms, and we asked some of our clinicians about what were the barriers for them, what was stopping them from involving carers more. And it was a whole host of reasons, but a big reason is that fear of litigation, fear of getting it wrong. They were worried about saying the wrong thing and then they get into trouble, or they'd upset somebody. They were worried about how much time it takes. They felt they were so busy on the wards, particularly, that they didn't have the time to speak to a family member because they would feel that it would take a lot of time. People were worried about, I think, just upsetting people and that kind of level of emotion, and didn't know how to handle it. So there's a kind of a whole host of reasons why professionals don't talk to carers. And the fact that Debbie and I sort of co-delivering this training and bringing together, I think one of the key things about the workshops and the training is that we actually brought together carers and clinicians into the same room. Although it's a virtual room, we were bringing them together into a room. And I think that was, I don't think there's any other training that's done that before, because, and actually it was, we can talk a bit later about the benefits of that, actually being and hearing people's stories and what it was like. And But even when it's just Debbie doing the training, I mean, Debbie talking about her experiences is so powerful of what it was like being a carer that, you know, I think it was just incredibly powerful.
And I think that's from the co-production process. I mean, what started out as a workshop to upskill carers. So a lot of my experience is that carers, in part due to austerity and cuts to services, also just a shift towards community-based, home-based treatments, that carers are holding increasingly high levels of risk. And carers don't have training, they don't have support, they don't have supervision, they don't have colleagues, and often are incredibly isolated. And what started out as to develop some training to upskill carers about suicide prevention, fundamentally. It's like, how can we help carers to feel more confident about supporting someone at risk of harm? The conversations that emerged from that lived experience perspective, it became really evident that that alone wasn't going to be enough, that we needed to have another aspect to the training, which was about culture change. So it was around changing attitudes to carers. We know that historically the attitudes towards carers and families have not always been positive. And certainly as a family member, I've felt that myself, you know, that often there's a sense of being blamed in some way, but there's certainly a sense of being marginalized and excluded by professionals, by clinicians. And so there's one aspect is the attitudes, but the other thing was around consent and information sharing. And that's why our whole second workshop, so the day 2 of Stronger Together, is around looking at those barriers and working out together, carers and clinicians together, looking at how can we break down some of these barriers so that we can work collaboratively. We're all on the same team. We all want the same thing. And trying to really kind of, look at the consent, information sharing, confidentiality issues and how nuanced they are. And I think often the training that I know Devon Partnership Trust, we've talked about this, you know, the training around confidentiality and information sharing almost puts terror into people, like you mustn't talk to, you know, and it's not that straightforward, and certainly not in the realm of suicide prevention. It's much more nuanced, and there is a responsibility to share with family members if it improves patient safety. And there's a lot that can be said that isn't breaking a confidence, and there's never a barrier to listening to carers. So I think it is around changing that culture. It is around wanting to work collaboratively for better patient outcomes.
I think, you know, drawing on what you said a little bit there, I think you're absolutely right that there is something a bit with training, a bit worrying about getting into trouble. But I wonder as well, there's a lot, you know, sometimes that's used as a smoke screen when staff are genuinely don't know what to say. And so instead of just saying, this is frightening, because it is really frightening, isn't it, to be in a situation for everybody to be around such high level of emotional need and potential risk is really scary. But I can't remember ever really talking about the emotional impact of that, either on carers, you know, people who can't sleep, they don't know when they're going to get a phone call, or on staff who have to make a decision about whether someone's okay or not, and then potentially sit in a coroner's court. We don't really talk about the weight of that at all.
No, and you're right, Nicky. I think it is really important, and some people did talk about that kind of emotional burnout from, you know, about and what that feels like, and whether they're getting the right support to manage some of that when, you know, that it, you know, it clearly comes if you're talking to a carer with some emotional weight there, doesn't it? That's very clear. But I think one of the things that Debbie and I talked a lot about in the training was that clinicians and staff were talking about their worry, their fear, whatever it is, about how angry carers were when they spoke to them, the family members, and how not knowing how to do, and I guess one of the things we talked about was about trying to enable them to look behind some of that anger, and trying to not taking it at face value, but trying to understand that actually. And Debbie gives, what's the lovely quote that you give, Debbie, about grief?
Yeah, so I sat with my anger long enough until she told me her real name was Grief.
Yeah.
I think, you know, for me as a carer, often the fact that I had been excluded from my daughter's care and support, that I was somehow made to feel like an interloper. I was made to feel like I shouldn't be involved. Yet, you know, when my daughter became ill, she was only 16, and that went on until she was about 27. So, you know, it's like how when you don't involve carers, and so in my dissertation that for my master's degree was about this training, and I think we can share a link for that. But you know, a lot of what we found was that caregivers' needs around for support, for inclusion, to feel empowered in their role as a carer are really important to carer well-being. So what the evidence shows, and certainly my own lived experience, is that the more excluded you are, the more that frustration builds, the more anxious you become, the more you imagine the worst, and the more it creates a division between services and families. I think then if something does go wrong, then there's this culture of blaming, where parents, carers, family members are blaming services. Yet if we'd all work together, there wouldn't be that same. I personally believe, you know, that there isn't that need to blame, because we would all have been working to the same script. So what we know is that that burden on families is much worse when they're excluded. We know that, you know, there's high levels of psychological distress in family members supporting someone who is suicidal. And that we know is made worse by a lack of support, a lack of information, and a lack of involvement.
And we try and talk to people in the training about saying, just, you know, when you are, if somebody is angry, to kind of, you know, put yourself in their shoes. You might be the sixth person they've spoken to that day. They might have gone from pillar to post, or you know, when they've rung the water, for example, it might be someone saying that we're just busy at the moment, or it's dinner time, can you ring back? And just trying to think about some of those things that actually, you know, what might be behind some of that. And as Debbie said, you know, people, you can imagine at first admission how terrified people are about their family member coming into hospital, what that means, what that's like. Not to mention all the guilt and stuff that goes alongside some of that, isn't it? And so, you know, it's just trying to, and it is that balance, Nicky, you're right, because, you know, it is, you know, for staff who are trying to care for that person, and you've also got a family member, you know, that's very distressed. There is a lot of emotional weight to carry, isn't it, for a member of staff, and we have to acknowledge that and try and support them with that, because that supporting that carer role is really important, and can't just be, you know, we don't put aside people's medication because it's too difficult, do we? You know, we still kind of, you know, and carers need to be up there saying, actually, as Debbie has said, yeah, this is really important, and if we get it right, this will make a difference towards somebody's recovery, and support the carer at the same time.
It's strange, because I don't know how we managed to get it all so wrong.
I know.
They're not two groups of people who want the same thing more.
I know.
That's what's so weird. And, you know, we seem to have got into either oppositional or absentee kind of relationships, and it's not helpful to anybody. So it also sounds like the key to sorting this out, which now seems obvious now you've said it, is to talk openly to each other. Who knew? Will it catch on? But I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about that process, you know, of co-producing not only your research, Debbie, but also this workshops, how it happened, and what was gained by it.
Yeah, definitely. So part of my master's, I actually carried out some primary research about the co-production process itself, and I became interested in how, you know, I think a lot when we talk about co-production, you think about the benefits to, I don't know, to services, or the benefits to the person with lived experience. But what I became really interested in is how, through co-production, the content of the training evolved over time. That, you know, as I said, one workshop came purely from that co-production process. But I think what everyone spoke about in the research I did was just how much their understanding of other people's perspectives grew through that process. And it took time, you know, but over time, I know myself and other people, lived experience people who were involved in that process, said, oh, actually, it was really helpful hearing clinicians talk. Oh, you know, I can change my perspective. And then clinicians also saying, I'd never even thought about it from that point of view. And so there was that growing understanding that grew, between all those people, the 13 of us who were involved in that co-production process. And that's what we've carried into the training itself. As George said, we co-deliver the training. So lived experience, clinician working side by side, absolutely as equals in that space. And I think that has been something, well, I don't think, we've from the evaluation of Stronger Together that was carried out by Exeter University, so it was an external evaluation that was carried out, that there's been a lot of feedback about that co-delivery model, the importance of hearing both perspectives, and being open about it, being open about the challenges, and also in that co-learning space, bringing carers and clinicians together to discuss the issues around information sharing, confidentiality. Has been so powerful, because people have come away saying, I didn't understand how difficult it is for clinicians to walk this path, didn't understand how complicated it is. And I think you used earlier the word smokescreen, Nicky, which is very much how it feels from a carer perspective, being told, I'm sorry, I can't tell you anything because of confidentiality. It's infuriating, and you don't really know what it means. And it does just feel like someone's slamming the door in your face. And so I think what's been created through the co-learning and co-delivery is, I don't know, I mean, how much we've learned from each other, how much we continue to learn from each other in that space. Every time we deliver it, clinicians sharing something, it opens my mind and it opens my heart, actually, because I have heard the other side where, when I was trying to support my daughter, she was my everything. It was everything to me. It was her safety and trying to help her and trying to work out how I could support her. And I think in that space, everyone can become quite closed off. So I think not only was the co-production so powerful in terms of opening people's eyes and perspectives, and building understanding, building a shared narrative. But yeah, that co-learning and co-delivery model that we've carried on with has been really, had huge benefit to the training. I think almost more than the content. Content's important, but
and I'd really echo that, Debbie. And it's actually, that we've talked about that. We've tried to unpick actually about the importance of the co-delivery model, haven't we? And about sharing that power. It's not for me as the clinician that I am. I mean, obviously, Rickard's obviously, for Debbie as a carer, but we work very closely together. And for me, I don't feel that I'm any more important than Debbie. Debbie is huge. We both carry equal weight. We bring equal things to the
different types of experience as well, isn't it? And I think absolutely right, expertise.
Yeah. Absolutely. And if we'd done it just clinicians delivering this training, which would have been an option, and I think 5 years ago, probably looking at some training like this, we wouldn't have even considered doing it with, it wouldn't have been co-produced. We'd have written something and thought, that will do that, we certainly wouldn't have co-delivered it. And actually just shows how forward thinking the training has been, actually. And, I sort of don't think we anticipated how big a difference that co-delivery was
I think it's transformative, to be honest.
Yeah.
We think so too, Nicky.
Well, I guess you do. Well, let's come to Vanessa. I know that you've got questions, Vanessa, and then
I mean, first of all, a reflection, really. I think definitely something massive there around culture change, because I think my reflection as I'm listening is that we kind of trying to move away as a mental health culture from sort of risk stratification and kind of looking at people's levels of risk in that tick box kind of way, to a sort of culture where we're kind of trying to look more at safety planning. And for me, that shift towards safety planning is where carers come in, because it's all about person-centred care, isn't it? It's all about understanding the person and where they're at and what their strengths are, and what their difficulties are, and how, a person's personal situation will impact on their level of you know, suicide risk potentially. So that's my first reflection. And then my second reflection is, funnily enough, I've had some conversations about this recently clinically, just about staff feeling that they're burdening carers by feeling that they're kind of transferring, you know, responsibility around keeping somebody safe to a carer. And sort of the burden of that, you know, the level of responsibility. And I guess it's about understanding that we don't need to be so polarized, do we? It's about, you know, working together. So, yes, you know, supporting carers and understanding, you know, the emotional, you know, impact and, you know, what support carers need, and not kind of handing everything over to carers, but at the same time understanding that, you know, as Debbie said, you know, carers want to be involved. If it's a family member and you love that family member, then it doesn't feel natural, does it, to kind of hand over to a hospital and then back off and say, you know, I don't want to be involved anymore.
Well, there's something still about that medical model, isn't there, that we're fighting against, aren't we? And that's somebody coming to the hospital and then we think we know best, and we're going to take all the risk away from everybody here, you know, and you know, the family are out there, you know, and then suddenly we're sending people out back into that environment, and so it's surprised when it, you know, that it goes wrong, isn't it? Because actually, you know, as Debbie and I often talk about that stuff right from the very beginning, that inclusion, those conversations, and there's always going to be those people we know where there are safeguarding issues, or people genuinely, you know, don't want to consent for all sorts of reasons, isn't it? But ultimately, you know, for the most part, that there are families out there who are doing an awful lot, as Debbie said right at the very beginning, who are doing a lot of that support out there in the community when professionals have gone home, you know, all the services have gone, isn't it? They are the people that are holding the risk. And then we, you know, and so we need to be supporting people with that.
Yes, I agree.
And that includes even when someone is admitted, because it's just as important that people are still then included in the discharge, you know, the assessment plans, you know, discharge, about what that means, you know, when someone's coming out. So you want to add to that, Debbie?
Yeah, I was just thinking ultimately whether clinicians speak to carers and families or not, they're still holding the burden. It doesn't go away. So actually what you're trying to do is support someone with your hands tied behind your back, and it's great. And I think, you know, what the research evidence shows is that actually through information, through understanding suicidality, you know, a lot of people, I mean, that's one of the things that for me was so helpful, was the more I understood what my daughter was going through, the more I was able to stay present with the challenges, the more I was informed. So really important to have that psychoeducation, but also it's around carers learning some self-care techniques, because this is, you know, sometimes carers are in this for the long haul. You know, I've been doing this for 13 years. I mean, I'm lucky my daughter's now well, no longer under mental health services and living a full and happy life. But 13 years is a long time to live alongside a suicidal individual. It is exhausting and terrifying and bewildering. And the most terrifying thing I've ever done in my life was trying to work out how to support someone when you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what to say, you don't know how to help. So that burden is already there, regardless of whether anybody talks to us or not. But what we know is that, you know, the more information we've got, not only does that increase confidence and competence of carers in that caring role, which has got to be better for everybody, but also again helps carer mental health. You know, there's a lot of evidence that shows, particularly for carers supporting someone who's suicidal, as you know, their own PTSD, their own other, you know, mental distress. So those people then end up using services as well, and there's evidence in Devon that talking services in, you know, in Devon, a lot of the people who use that are carers. So actually, you know, we're adding to the burden on services as well as the burden on carers by not involving them. So I think, you know,
because when we were delivering the first workshop just to carers, Debbie, weren't there? The carers we found had the things they talked about were very similar themes, wasn't it? And the biggest theme, I think, was kind of like that isolation, wasn't it? So when we actually brought the carers together for the training, they really valued that. Being able to share their experiences with each other was just really important. And it didn't matter that Debbie and I had set up breakout rooms talking about this, that, and the other. Actually, what they wanted to just do is share with each other their experience about what it was like, because they were feeling very isolated. And there's something also very, I don't know if you'd agree, Debbie, there's something very, there's still a lot of stigma around caring for someone who's feeling suicidal, that kind of, you know, chronic mental health, isn't there? And so you feel with people, there's a bit of shame about talking about, you know, this is what their experience is in, and that people will blame you around that.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of shame. I mean, there's a huge amount of shame within society around suicide still, and that doesn't stop with the individual. That also impacts on the families, and it was a very lonely place to find myself, very isolated. I'm very lucky that I have a supportive family, my parents, my sister, of people I was able to share with who did their best to support me. But I know there are a lot of people who haven't got that. There are a lot of people who are trying to navigate this on their own, and don't know what to do, and find themselves just, I don't know, somehow blamed, or a sense of being blamed, even if it's not actually explicit. There's some kind of sense that in some way you failed as a parent, particularly, I think. What have I done wrong? Certainly I went through a lot of guilt and shame about, you know, what did I do wrong for my daughter to end up this way. It was only because I have a son as well, and it was like, well, he's not like that. So, you know, in the early days there was a lot of me thinking, oh my goodness, you know, why didn't I see this coming? What could I have done differently? And that doesn't help anybody to do that. So some of what we do within Stronger Together is also looking at building emotional resilience for carers. So how can they emotionally regulate themselves so that their fear and their, you know, anxiety around what the cared for person is going through, we don't end up projecting our own fears onto that individual and maybe becoming too smothering, sort of wanting to protect them, but actually learning to try and step back a bit to give them a sense of space and responsibility. And that's really hard as a carer, when all you want to do is stop this person from maybe ending their life. So I think it's, you know, carers need to know how to resource themselves to stay present. And I always say that I feel that my job through my daughter's illness was to hold hope for her when she had none for herself. And, you know, to keep holding that hope, I had to have hope myself. I had to believe somehow it could change, you know, and that's hard. That's hard to do on your own. And I just tried to resource myself as much as I could. And that's some of what we're trying to pass on to carers, is how they can resource themselves so that they can stay present and stay emotionally available and be able to support someone at a time when actually probably the one thing you want to do is just run in the opposite direction. I know there were times when I just wanted to run for the hills and never think about it again, but obviously and I think that's why some carers probably in the end disengage. And I hear people say, oh, this person hasn't got anybody who we haven't got a carer we can contact. And then I think, why is that? What's happened in someone's life that in the end there is nobody? And I think that's because carers get burnt out. And you know, you have to support carers to stay present so that we can continue to be a resource, just like you as staff need to be, you know, trained and have supervision and colleagues and have places you can go where you can talk. And it's still a really difficult job to do. I don't underestimate at all the challenges of, you know, from a clinical perspective. But equally, you know, my request is always that clinicians don't underestimate how difficult it is as a carer or a family member to be holding that with no training, with no acknowledgement of the emotional burden. And you know, a lot of
there's very little out there for carers, isn't there, Debbie? That's one thing we've discovered, isn't it? There's very little support out there. And with our own organisation, you know, we signpost people to Devon carers, Torbay carers, But actually, in terms of some of the stuff that Debbie was talking about, which the Stronger Together, the sort of first workshop covers, there's very little of that kind of education and support and looking after themselves out there. You know, there's some real gaps there.
I guess another thing that sort of pops into my head from what you're saying is, I think maybe staff do underestimate the pain of being a carer as well as being a mom or a sister or a dad or brother, because you know you grow with this person, you see them when they're little. And I think about my baby sister or people in my family, like I've been hardwired from birth to stop them from hurting themselves and to worry about them, even though like my sister's really old now. She's still my baby sister, you know, I still worry about her. And I think we disengage because maybe it's too painful to imagine what that must be like. It's very easy for us to imagine like the difficulty of the emotional labor of professional caring. Professional caring is not a patch on personally caring.
No,
the pain and the cost of that love, because that's what it is, isn't it? And we all get a bit icky when we have to talk about love. It's all a bit much, but to love somebody who's in such danger is really just exhausting.
People are in such pain all the time, and it's not just a one-off like a broken leg, is it, that's going to recover?
And we don't do enough at all, I don't think, for people who have that acuity of experience.
And I think, you know, for me, there was a period of, I don't know, probably well over 6 months to a year before. I mean, my daughter's had many inpatient admissions, and the last one lasted 4 years. But you know, there was a period of time where I would worry every day when I went into her room what I would find, and you know, not unreasonably because of many things that happened. But even when she was inpatient, it didn't stop it. It still carried on, that fear, also with good reason, actually, because of the number of things that happened while she was inpatient. So, and I think what we know, what the evidence shows, and again in my dissertation, sort of looking at what exists already around suicide prevention, and kind of the gatekeeper training, suicide gatekeeper training, where we're talking about the general public knowing how to, you know, we say about suicide prevention being everyone's business, and I totally understand and agree with that. And so we're resourcing, trying to help people to identify, what might be the signs of someone being suicidal, and what should we do, how can we intervene? But none of those programs touch on the emotional burden of living alongside suicidality when you do have that personal connection to someone. And that's something that we've really built into Stronger Together, is trying to actually really acknowledge the emotional burden that caregivers carry, and you know, to address that, to acknowledge it, to validate it, and not just talk about the functional. Yes, well, you do this and then you refer on to services, and you know, those things are great if it's just a member of the public that you happen to encounter, you know, but not if you're living with that person. That's not enough. And so that's again a kind of fairly unique aspect to Stronger Together, is really focusing in on the emotional challenges, and what we can do about that. So
well, I think what's powerful, Debbie, in the training is, as I think that is the powerful voice that you bring to that training, isn't it? People hearing about your experiences, and because you talk very eloquently and articulately about that, and people really hear that and really feel that. I think people really kind of put themselves and think, gosh, I really hear that's what it must, how difficult that must be. And I think people often don't really, when they're staff working, don't think about that. I think you're right, Nicky. People don't really think about that. And I think it really, you know, comes home, some of the stories that Debbie tells during the training about her experience, and whether it's drive when her daughter was out of county and having to drive to London to go and see her, or you know, some experiences from the wards. Or I kind of always remember Debbie talking about whenever the phone rang and you could see it was a hospital number, thinking, oh God, what's happened now? That dread, isn't it? And people not even thinking as a clinician when you're ringing up that might be somebody thinking, oh God, they only ring when something terrible has happened. You know, what that emotional impact must be like is huge, isn't it?
But people get desensitized, don't they, as well? I think that's part of the situation and the problem, that you know, people working in those situations, nurses, get desensitized naturally because of, you know, the level of other people's pain that they're exposed to, you know, day after day. And I don't think people always realize that they've gone through that process of desensitization. And for me, it links back to what we were saying before about the importance of person-centered care. But that's also painful because then it's kind of focusing on the person and who the person is, and it's easier to kind of work within a system, isn't it? So I think, yeah, I think that's some of that as well that kind of plays out then, and that you know, inhibited empathy really about kind of putting yourself into somebody else's shoes and, you know, thinking about what it might be like to receive that phone call, for example.
Yeah.
You've got therapeutic nihilism coming into play as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Where people are just they're just overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Say things like, if someone is really intent on dying, you can't do anything about it, and you just think, can you hear yourself?
Yeah,
you genuinely think you're no flipping good, and there's nothing you have to offer, or there's nothing at all that you can do. Time for a different job.
Yeah,
take a little break and go and do something else, because I find it extraordinary. And then occasionally you'll come across environments where that type of lack of belief in their own potential to be a human being alongside another human being is actually voiced publicly. You're like, this is a whole culture issue now.
Yeah, but I think there's also, for me,
stopping themselves from being in pain, I think, but it's not.
I mean, I think there's also some for me, there's some kind of self-reflection, you know, doing the training with Debbie and thinking about my own desensitization, because, you know, Debbie and I were doing the training quite regularly. And I guess I had to keep myself in check to think, actually, you know, when we did the training, there were times when, if we faced a group of clinicians that were maybe a little bit more challenging about the care of voice, which is true, we did face that, then what I found is Debbie would give more of herself during those sessions to kind of, is that the right word, to counteract some of that, really. And, you know, and I guess I'm not sure what I'm trying to say, really, except that I really felt that for Debbie, that she was doing that and thinking, actually, I have some responsibility here. And it's not like Debbie is just, during the training, Debbie, it wasn't like you were just telling a story, you're reliving that story. And I'm just conscious of about how much Debbie giving, the amount that she gave, can be re-triggering. And, you know, I'm asking, or we're asking Debbie to go back into a really horrible time in her life, and although things are good now, into that really horrible time. And I think it's something for me, as somebody co-delivering something, being really mindful that actually I'm asking
your
somebody
partner,
to do something really difficult.
It's a different, and I've thought about that before when I've kind of been involved with work with carers who, you know, kind of come into events and tell the story, and, you know, go around the country and tell the story again and again and again about the kind of ethics of that. I mean, often it's people who want to do that and they want to kind of share the story, but as you say, it's the cost of having to, you know, share something personal again and again and again, which isn't the same as sharing a professional story at all.
No, or there were times, as we discovered by chance, really, that we'd go to do one of the training, and Debbie would find actually there was a member of staff there. He was a member of staff that had looked after her daughter. Isn't that right, Debbie? And so there were moments there where Debbie would say, "Oh my God, that's so and so," you know, and whereas you would remember them, quite often they didn't remember you, did they, Debbie?
Yeah.
And I think when we were even planning delivering the training, it didn't really occur to us actually that might happen, or didn't. That's my learning. You know, it didn't really occur to me that might be the case,
Debbie, because there's two things. One, obviously, a bit like a fan club of yours, and it must be a bit weird to sit here, Debbie, go on. But also, your face is so expressive. Very clear what you think, so let's just get it out there.
I have to be a bit careful in training. It's like, sort of, what do I really think? And if my daughter's inherited that from me, I think she's also got a very, you know exactly what she's thinking.
Speaking countenances.
But I suppose I was just thinking about, you know, within a, I don't know, like just what you shared, Vanessa, then about people with lived experience going around telling their story, and I have a bit of a thing about that, and people thinking that that's the best way to involve people with lived experience. I think something that Stronger Together has really proved is that actually people with lived experience they don't just have lived experience, they also have their life skills, their professional skills that they may have, and all of that can play a part. And actually, when we're thinking about co-production, it's about giving people with lived experience that opportunity to identify what the problem is and to co-create the solution. It's not just about someone showing up and telling your story. Because actually now within Stronger Together, yes, George is right that sometimes when there is a bit of kickback against what we're talking about, I noticed that I was sharing more, almost as a way to try and convince people. And I've learned to not do that anymore, because actually that hurts me more than it's going to do anything to change people's minds. So I think it's kind of recognizing the challenges around that, and lived experience involvement, and making sure that there's the right help and support available for people doing lived experience work, which is largely missing still. You know, and if we're, as we should be, or as mental health services should be, involving lived experience more and more, then we need to change the dynamic of that lived experience involvement, and you know, within a recovery model of mental health. You know, when we're all, I don't know, it's just like this kind of idea of, if we're all working together, you know, I know it's, I don't know, it all starts to feel like much more important to work together, and that then the burden is reduced for everybody if we're all working together. If we think about suicide as a not just something that's, or suicidality, not just something that's situated within the person, but also recognizing that people are impacted by their environment, their social conditions, their, you know, look at the state of what the world we live in right now. Is it any wonder, with the cost of living crisis and all the other things that are going on, that suicidality isn't just something going on in the person. It's a product of how people's lives are and where they live and how they're affected, and then therefore we need to create a solution around that person that isn't just a medical solution that goes, oh yeah, we'll either put you in a
medication,
we'll give you some medication and we'll section you and we'll put you in an inpatient unit, which I appreciate. There are times when that can be helpful, but it's not a solution. We're not solving anything by doing that. And I
don't know about you, Debbie. It's one of the most. I think of all the bits of work that I've done, this piece of work is truly co-production, isn't it?
Yes. Absolutely.
Right from, you know, from start to finish, and any time we do anything, it's always that, you know, we'll do it together. It's never just me, you know, doing that. It's just really important that it's, you know, all the way through, and we still give thanks to the people that were part of that co-production process, those people who lived experience, to say this is where we are with it, you know, because it looks like it's just me and Debbie, and it isn't that. There was a, you know, group of people behind us that were a part of that were putting it all together. You know, we've been lucky enough to be the people to be able to co-deliver it, but actually, you know, it's much bigger than that, isn't it?
I can see that time is ticking on for us. I can't believe it already. And I guess it'd be really useful for us to think about, you know, what lessons can be taken forward from this. Emma Dillon said it's really vital work, be great in education, talking about mental health students and social workers as well. So we'll certainly share that around. And Sheila Ramon says you're really all highlighting the significance of genuinely listening to each other. It's nice, isn't it? If there's nothing else to be said. So we've talked about the issue and why it's needed. We've tweeted out places where people can go and learn more about what you've accomplished, because it is a massive thing that you've done, really important. So I wondered if we could come to everybody in turn and maybe think about what can we do better? What can we take forward from this?
I just before we just do that, I just wanted to just tell you about our next steps with Stronger Together, because we delivered a pilot. We had it evaluated by Exeter University, and that was the end of last year. And then there's been some challenges about what next for it, where are we going to go? Because as we all know, working for the NHS, there's a number of committees and hoops and to jump through. But just last week or the week before, we've just been given some money to roll it out for a year. So I just wanted to say, so the training is Debbie and I are just about to re-meet and sort out some dates. So I just wanted to say that, you know, yes, it was a pilot, but actually, you know, a bit of a thank you to the NHS, Devon Partnership Trust, because actually we are going to be rolling this out. And I think that's a really big step forward, because there were moments when we thought, we've done this pilot, is that it? What's going to happen? But actually, you know, we've managed to push it through. Debbie and I have been to lots of meetings, and so we have got a year's funding to keep going. So
it's really good. Yeah, it needs to be beyond Devon maybe as well, doesn't it? Or the model applied beyond Devon as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why doing something like this is so important, because it gets the message out there, doesn't
I
it?
agree.
So,
Yeah, definitely.
I think for
sorry,
me,
Nicky, I interrupted you.
I think for me, that's what I'd really like to see, is this this rolled out more widely, that other trusts take it and deliver it. It's there. You know, it's a resource that people could use. We know it's effective from the feedback we've got. You know, that we know that clinicians, 100% of the clinicians who attended said they now feel they have techniques to overcome the barriers to collaborative working, that they've got improved understanding of consent and confidentiality, that they feel more confident working with families. So we know that it's achieved. It's what we set out to achieve. And I suppose, yes, I would love to see it rolled out in part, you know, to support carers, but also I think more than anything, we need this change in culture within mental health services, so that people feel that they want to work with carers, that they understand how important it is. And ultimately, this is about saving people's lives. You know, this is what we're talking about here. And, you know, as someone who has I've nearly lost my daughter on more occasions than I can share. And you know, I know so many families who are going through this. You know, George gave the statistics at the beginning, and it's huge. And I just feel surely we all, what's already happening within mental health services, we all know doesn't really work that well. It doesn't always keep people safe, and that's not to criticize all the individuals who are working in this space, because I know that the service and the system lets clinicians down as much as it lets patients and staff and families down. You know, I think if we're honest, we all know it doesn't really work. And I feel like Stronger Together in some ways offers a different way of doing things. It models a way of working that I think gives hope. I think you know, so much is about listening to each other and learning and being willing to learn from each other, and not everybody sort of seeing that thinking they're the expert, but actually, you know, let's pool our resources and learn together. And yeah, I think thinking about listening itself as a therapeutic intervention is so underestimated. I mean, you can throw all sorts of evidence-based practice at people, but actually, if you talk to my daughter, it'll be the people that really listen to her that have made that the biggest difference. So, and I think listening to carers is also, there's a resource there that is largely untapped at the moment, that I think in the given climate that we have with an NHS, no money, stretched to breaking point, that actually there is an untapped resource in carers and families that if it's done right and done well, could make a huge difference.
Well, we are stronger together, as the training says.
We are stronger together.
Stronger together.
Yeah, definitely.
Vanessa, is there anything you wanted to add before we start to wrap things up? Any questions?
I mean, we've had some comments, mainly not really questions so much, just praise for the you know, the training and suggestions that it's included in nurse education and the education of other professionals, I think, which fits with what I was saying about the kind of need to reach beyond probably Devon, or, you know, for other areas to adapt this model. I think for me, just what I said earlier, really, my reflection really is around you know, the move towards sort of safety planning for people, that's essential, and, you know, being more person-centered. I think that kind of approach lends itself, doesn't it, to working more in collaboration with carers, and, you know, putting aside power dynamics between, you know, professionals and, you know, people who use services and carers. I guess I think that's the biggest reflection for me. I mean, it sounds brilliant and, you know, transformative. I think it's really good to hear that this is happening, and and it'd be lovely to see it happening in other parts of the country too, I think.
Definitely. Well, any suggestions on how to make that happen?
Well, I can talk. Maybe we can have a conversation about Sheffield, where I work, and offline as well, and see if there's anything connection that we can build there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, we're very proud of it. We're proud of what is already achieved, and you know, it's yeah, it is something to be proud of for sure, on so many levels.
Yeah, absolutely. It's life changing, isn't it? Really. So yeah,
it does feel transformative, as Nicky was saying. It does.
Yeah,
I think that's the power of co-production, isn't it? And you see it done badly in places when people are trying to cut corners or trying to pretend something's co-production. It's actually absolutely not.
yeah.
But what really matters, when you see it done properly, you know it's been done properly because it works. It takes a bit longer sometimes, but it works, and that's
exactly.
So I don't want to sort of finish anybody off too much, but is there anything that you guys wanted to say before we finish up? Debbie, George?
I don't think so. I think we've kind of said it all, except, you know, just to say it's been great to have the opportunity to talk about it, because actually one of the things I think Debbie and I would like is that, you know, for the learning, for the model to spread, because actually, as far as we know, there is no other training that includes carers and practitioners together, and it's such a big but yeah, that ideally that's what we'd like to happen. So maybe we should patent it and do that. That's what we should do. But yeah, so, and it's just been great working with Debbie. It's just been you know, I've learned so much, and you know, we've become friends outside of it, because it's just been, you know, a really good experience. And it could really not have been that, you know, it could have been very different, but actually you know, we've you know, we've worked together, and it's been great.
It has
Really
Fantastic. So for anyone who's found this like moving or important, or seen like maybe even a potential to share it in other trusts and think about ways that we can spread this idea, please do. Please retweet it or get in contact, do something if this has touched you, because we really do want to see better care everywhere, really. Next week, we've got our colleagues coming from Surviving in Scrubs, talking about the kind of mission they've had, looking very much at kind of misogyny and sexism in the NHS and things that we can do to protect each other and to have a better, safer space for all of us to be in. So I hope you'll be joining us next week as well. And just remains to thank our guests so much. Very inspirational. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys.
Yeah.
Night,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.